very happy and glad. Hello? Yeah. I will actually use both microphones. I hope you're not going to get confused. There's another one. Okay. So, I'm glad to speak today. And I think what we're going to do in this section is actually apply. Is everybody fine with the translation? I will speak in English. Kulshai? So, we will apply a little bit what we've learned yesterday, or what we have discussed with regards to concepts of media literacy, to a very up-to-date and important mobilizations around feminist hashtags. So it's called, my lecture is called From Taharrush to Me Too, and I work very much with concepts of public spheres and counter-public spheres. So my first question is actually, who is familiar with the hashtag Taharrush? Who has heard of it? Okay. Who has heard of Me Too? Okay. Is there anybody who would like to just give a short, give a short definition of what are these hashtags about? Or like give a short, yes. You were first, maybe. Just to make sure we all know what we're talking about in the room.
I will talk about Me Too because I didn't hear about Taharrush before. And we have like a similar experience in Egypt. It's called Harassment Map. And it was like led by the American University in Cairo. Actually, Me Too is a hashtag for girls and women to share experiences, personal experiences about sexual harassment. It's more or less a kind of solidarity in order to find a space where all people who have encountered a similar sexual abuse in any ways to share experiences and share their feelings about it. It's more or less a self-expression with a kind of social support, and it got so popular because a lot of celebrities around the globe, a lot of public figures participated in it too. And actually, yeah.
Thank you very much. You're already going into an analysis, actually. Great, yeah, thank you. Does anybody wants to add something on that? Jada, you want, yeah?
Yeah, I just wanted to say that it's special because it's a public discourse that emerged on the internet from the public, and it was later on picked up by the mainstream media. So this was also a very special attribute of this discourse. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, wonderful. Like, okay, you want to one third comment on?
As for Me Too, the hashtag was very trendy after the allegations against Harvey Weinstein, when the famous actresses, started to speak against the harassment that the media guru started to do for them. So they started to sue them and put on the internet the situations that they have encountered harassment for him. And then started to use hashtag Me Too, that yes, Harvey Weinstein harassed me too, because they were very afraid to speak against him, so they would not be allowed to enter Hollywood again and pursue a career in movie and theater.
Exactly. Wonderful. So yeah, now we already have discovered different dimensions to it. What we've heard is it's happening, or it happened on the internet. You were referring also to harassment. We will come back to this later, because this is what I call then your bridge, you spilling over to physical space. So we can we can analyze wonderfully here the interaction between mass media. Jada, you mentioned it, mass media and hashtags, but also the physical space. And you were referring to the origins, actually. How did this hashtag emerge, and why did it gain such a momentum? But what we can say is that, of course, there is something that I like to refer to as hashtag herstory, because Me Too was very prominent, of course, but there was another hashtag from the United States that was called We Are All Women. In 2014, there was a prominent hashtag Aufschrei in Germany, which I analyzed in 2015. Moi aussi j'ai été violentée, that was a hashtag that was attempted to be launched but didn't gain such a momentum in Tunisia. Taharush, we heard about it, and here in Lebanon, we heard Mishbasita, yes. So what we can say already is that they are all organized, or we see here feminist mobilization around the same subject, sexual harassment, sharing experiences, but they are also somehow localized. So they emerge in different national contexts or local contexts, and it's interesting also to just trace back the different herstories. So what I would now like to engage with you in the second step. Like I said already, it can be a wonderful empirical example of media literacy, but what are for you now the main dimensions where you could apply media literacy? What's got media literacy to do with feminist hashtags?
Hello. Policy change. Most countries that have started using hashtags to gather awareness have been able to incur policy change. For example, Qanun 520, I forgot the number, the actual title of it, which was going to be, which was removed in Lebanon, which allowed a rapist to marry his victim instead of going to jail. And the hashtag that was launched by the hashtag, along with the videos by Leo Burnett, which was funded by NGOs within Lebanon, were able to convince politicians to vote against it for policy change.
So a very positive example of participatory politics, right? Like with actual policy outcomes. Mm-hmm. Via media, of course.
I think it also helps in creating a supportive community and eventually a supporting system for all of those who reach out to be part of the conversation throughout the hashtags. And to add on my classmates' comment, it's also to put this pressure on decision makers and regulators to kind of make a change in the system.
I think it's interesting to see how media literacy can also be kind of, I would describe it as a self-developing process that develops during these discourses. I mean, just the awareness that people gain through sharing these stories. They don't need someone to tell them, okay, if you use hashtags and create a lot of publicity, you'll gain attention. But everyone kind of realizes that like this hashtag actually has power. So they realize how it's not, they as people, they have the power to post something, to create a community. So it kind of develops from within.
So you would refer here to an analysis of how is the community being built and how it works in a natural way. So without anybody imposing the rules. Yeah, one last comment.
I guess media literacy would help us understand the purpose behind the hashtag, because sometimes people corrupt the hashtag and share false stories and try to monopolize it to serve a specific agenda. Sometimes in feminist hashtags specifically, guys enter the hashtag and start to joke about it or post something that has negative comments on it. So they corrupt the hashtag rather than they support it that will serve a greater purpose for women. So I guess if we have media literacy skills, that we understand why there is the hashtag on the internet, then it will serve the purpose that is created for it instead of making it a joke.
Yeah, wonderful, yeah. So in this now first 5 minutes, we have really already opened up so many interesting dimensions, and I hope in this talk I will satisfy some of these needs that are definitely in the room. What you refer to is what I call hijacking hashtags, and there are, of course, and I think also media literacy plays a huge role in educating activists in how to encounter these attempts to hijack hashtags. And we will come to one very funny example, in my opinion, later. Are there any more comments? Yes, please.
Also, to encourage men to participate in such hashtags and raise awareness that harassment isn't an issue for women or about women, but it's about the whole community. In Egypt, there was a hashtag امسك متحرش or catch a harasser, and there was an active participation of men. They were capturing photos of the harassers in the street and publish it to Facebook and Twitter and so on, something like scandal, or they were make all the people see his face. امسك متحرش or catch a harasser in Egypt. And there was a very active participation from men. So it was a community participation, not women participation only.
Yeah, you're bringing up two very interesting issues. First, the question of participation of men, so that it's actually a gender issue. We're not talking about a women's issue. And the second is about self-justice that then has emerged, right? Like this development of the Taharush hashtag to then also shame and blame men on the internet. That can lead then also to self-justice that needs to be then again judged maybe on by other standards. Yeah, you want to comment on that?
You know, there was a very famous photo about capturing people who are pee in the street and published the video on YouTube. There is something like that. Putting shame on them.
Okay. Yeah. So this is also a way then to use the technologies, and I mean then from our point of view, we would have to evaluate what the technologies enables there, and whether we should not then put our energy more into a just system of justice and police that can or should prosecute this instead of putting it in the hand of the many, right? So, but we will come maybe back to this. I have just here put two dimensions. You mentioned many more. But of course, I think we should focus on digital empowerment. And what is interesting here is that the stories of the many reveal patterns and a structure of oppression. So we talked yesterday about objectivity and subjectivity. And I find this also very interesting because here we can see that the subject accounts of many become actually an image of a reality that has been excluded from the mainstream hegemonic public. So it's interesting to see here what subjectivity then actually can also do and how we should re-evaluate it maybe. Then when it comes to analysis, I think these hashtags also help to decode sexism in the mass media, because it's also very often a reaction and a protest against hegemonic stereotypes that are and portrayals of women and sexual relations and gender relations in the mass media. So, and very often these are also referenced then around these hashtags. So this is also another interesting field to study. So yeah, what I do today is I will discuss shortly with you some concepts. As I didn't say I'm a political scientist, and I work a lot with public sphere theory and intersectional theory. And I think that they can be helpful also to understand what's happening there, these feminist mobilizations. So I give a very short introduction there. And you can take this theoretical approach and you can leave it, right? Like it's just a suggestion. Then I give some ideas of how we can analyze hashtags. And that when we analyze these hashtags, we also always analyze power relations. And in the end, I will come to what you have also mentioned already, the outcomes. And maybe we also speak in the very end, because this is what was interesting in the lecture yesterday about values, right? So what is this actually all about? Do we agree on what we want? And I assume, yes, we all want peace. We want to live in a peaceful society. And then we need to redefine actually what is peace and what is security, and for whom. So yeah, this is what I'm now referencing as an article I wrote in 2015, and there I analyzed the hashtag outcry, the German hashtag, as I'm German, by the way. So I think, I would like to introduce you to Natalie Fenton, which is a wonderful critical scholar in public sphere theory. She claims that any mediated radical politics can only be understood if we first shed light on the actual public sphere, hegemonic public sphere, and how the media are functioning right now. I think the lecture we had right before was very interesting, especially with regards to the economy of the media that we should also keep in mind. And Fenton states that media routinely access and privilege elite definitions of reality and are claimed to serve ruling hegemonic interests, legitimize social inequality. This is what we actually talk about when we say, when we get out and talk about harassment, to actually encounter social inequalities based on gender in that case, mostly, and throughout participatory democracy. So yeah, this is what goes very much in line with Dr. King also just talked about before. So, and a second idea which I find interesting, or concept I would like to work is with Jürgen Habermas, of course, the godfather of public sphere theory, the libertarian one. He says, his very famous quote is, "The issues of political discourse become assimilated into and absorbed by the modes and contents of entertainment by these four core characteristics that engage people in privatism and depoliticize the public sphere, which is personalization, dramatization of events, simplification, and the vivid polarization." So, and I would argue that these core principles are also very much at stake and very powerful when we look at portrayal of gender relations in media before. So, and we can now see, or we can also discuss on how feminist hashtags encounter these hegemonic principles constructing the public sphere. So what is also actually, what I want to mention here is also that if we, what Dr. Gretchen said so wonderfully, is that if we only speak about problems of the individual, we don't change the system. That's what she said, right? And I think this is exactly what's in here with the idea of the personalization. If you personalize something, you don't need to see the structure behind. And now, again, if we bring it back to the idea of if it's many, you cannot ignore the structure, but we're still in a personalized discourse. So it's interesting how then here power relations can shift. Yeah, and quickly also I would argue that for political emancipatory transformation in a digitalized and a globalized world we're living in, we need to tackle always the three dimensions of the public sphere. Here I'm referring to a public sphere model by Peter Dahlgren, who distinguishes, I find this helpful for conversation, the structural, the representational, and the interactional dimension of the public sphere. And the first refers to media ecology, what we've heard in the morning. The second is representational, the media output. And the third is the interactional, the day-to-day interaction. This is actually what happens when you go out in public space. So this is this third dimension. It's also what we're creating here right now. Though if I'm being streamed, I contribute to media output. So you cannot also really, it's an analytical distinction, but of course this three dimensions also overlap. And yeah, so my thesis is if we want impact, or if we want to create change in societies, you need to tackle all three dimensions. It cannot only happen at one. So last but not least, I don't know, who of you has heard from the concept of counterpublics? Anybody's working with this? You are? Yeah? Yeah, I think it's just a general, she doesn't need to say anything, it's just a general question of who's familiar with it or not. Okay, so the counterpublic spheres concept was prominently discussed by Nancy Fraser, theoretician, and she introduces it by actually also criticizing Jürgen Habermas's public sphere model as being too normative, Eurocentric, and also not taking into consideration many exclusion processes that define the public sphere. So she defines counterpublics or subaltern counterpublics as parallel discursive arenas where members of subordinated social groups invent and circulate counter-discourses which in turn permit them to formulate oppositional interpretations of their identities, interests, and needs. So I don't know, does anybody want to comment on this definition and what we have just discussed at the beginning with what feminist hashtags are? Or, okay, so, but I guess it makes very much sense because when there come the narration of sexual harassment on an everyday basis expresses definitely needs, expresses or gives the floor to renegotiate also identities. We come back to this later. And of course, it's this, subordinated social groups that can gather together in a more or less more secure space and communicate oppositional interpretations of their reality. Actually, and also, this is what I call hashtagging the invisible, because before, I mean, now we're talking about this so easily, but I mean, I also remember 10 years ago, like that was not possible to get so many testimonies, to have access to so many people's, women's lives, and gather these stories. But the idea that the private is political is, of course, much older. And it was one of the slogans of the second wave feminist movements in Germany. So the idea of bringing the private to the public, because it is political, is of course older, and you can also apply it on other contexts. But then, of course, you can argue that with many-to-many media, it has been facilitated to actually make also the private public. So we spoke about the genesis of feminist hashtags. So when we come now to the analysis, I would say yes, of course. You see a media event, you see this discursive event of any hashtag, you trace back its origins. Like, this is the first thing that I would do. Where does it come from? And I think there are very different possibilities. Sometimes it's a prominent incident, or it is being as part of a wider movement. It's a development of another hashtag, like what you mentioned in the Egyptian case. It can be a reaction to media coverage. What is interesting with Me Too, which is the most powerful hashtag, I would say, because it comes from the center of power of image productions, which is Hollywood, right? There we actually had at the beginning the narrative that it was Alisa Milano who tweeted the first tweet, but the idea from Me Too comes actually from a Black American feminist, and we will now listen to what she has to say about her intent of what Me Too means. So Tarana Burke will explain it herself. But what we see is that you also always have, when you trace back origins, you always have to critically investigate, like, where does it really actually come from? What is the mass media telling me? And maybe also investigate further. But I would say in the case of Me Too, it has been now very much clarified that she is actually the person that's behind the idea, the emancipatory idea of Me Too. What does it mean?
When you go through something as traumatic as sexual violence, there's a way that you close up. Your protection, the way you protect yourself, is like you're shrouded in shame. And the disclosure, not just disclosure, but then the subsequent having somebody else connect with you and say, you're not alone in that, it just frees you. It frees you from the shame. You don't have to give the details, because the details really don't matter. If somebody is bold and stands up and tells their story, and you're not ready to do that, and that's not where you are in your journey, to just simply say, Me Too, is powerful, but it's soft. Me Too can be a conversation starter, or it can be the whole conversation.
Any comments on this? What is the emancipatory potential? Where does it lie, according to Tarana Burki?
Like, I would say in the simplicity of the act, because it's so simple, you can just write it, you don't have to create your own like content. It's just, you say Me Too and it's very simple. You don't have to share any details. And I know a lot of friends, and I think in my case too, I just wrote it. I didn't want to share the actual story, for instance, and it was just, okay, like, #Me Too, and that's it. And you get your message through, and everybody understands it. So.
Also in the case of Me Too in particular, when it started to blow up with the whole Harvey Weinstein story, it kind of, for me, it kind of counteracted this whole Hollywood thing where gossip is all around. The media in Hollywood always wants to know everything. They want to know every detail, and with Me Too, it was completely okay to just write the hashtag, and no one from within the group who could relate would start pressuring you to like share your story. It was completely fine if you were a part of it just because of the hashtag, not because you had to share your story. That for me was a very initial part of the whole movement, that it was okay to just be a part of it, but you didn't have to be sharing your story to be included. It was very inclusive in that kind.
Yeah, so you're pointing actually to this inclusivity of a hashtag. Also what has been said before, it was a momentum where it was about trying to somehow give a reflection of realities. I remember that was on my newsfeed, and women were saying, oh my God, this actually shows me how present it is. And present, maybe not that much on the representational level of the public sphere, but on the interactional level of the public sphere. There is a comment, yes.
And I've also seen it happen in one session where I'm from Egypt, so we had some representatives from the National Council of Women at a lecture, and somebody mentioned sexual harassment, and basically the National Council of Women is very pro-state and paints the image, it protects women's rights, but in its own way. So they didn't like the idea that people mentioned that there is sexual harassment happening in Egypt. So I think this is a great way for women to express themselves, and many women from the audience, they said, no, we've experienced this, so you can't say that because somebody mentioned a statistic that 98% of women in Egypt have been sexually harassed, and they said, no, what is your resource, where did you get this from, and all of that. So I think this is a great way for women to express themselves, and once you see the numbers of people sharing this hashtag, it becomes undeniable.
Yeah, you're referring also to a very important point, which is data collection on sexual harassment. It's very hard to make social studies. And then it's even harder to keep these results away from being politically instrumentalized. That's another problem there. Yes, there is another question over there. Can we have a microphone? Ah, okay, sorry. You as well?
It's a very good point you're making, because like during the, well, when the Me Too hashtag was booming, I was in Spain. And the feminist movements there were crazy. Like, they were demonstrating every week. On every big event, there was like a feminist movement. And I think it shows, it resonates with communities that need it. So you can see the Spanish community really needed to express that. They really felt identified with the problem. And it showed me that even, okay, because we consider Spain quite a developed European country, but you can see even there, it's a big problem, and people needed expression. And it showed me that something as simple as a hashtag can resonate so hard with a community that needs expression. And for me, it showed that it's good. It gave me a good feeling that women are finally like stepping up and showing that that they just don't feel okay in a community like this.
So this is also like what we've just seen, this idea of you are not alone. And of course, I think this effect gets even multiplied if you see them basically physically on the street. Yeah? And this is another question we may discuss later on, because, for example, a philosopher, Judith Butler, says, for politics to happen, the body must appear. So the question is really, is it in the end more also about the physical bodies that need to gather in squares, in demonstrations?
I'd like to talk about an issue that came up because of Me Too, which was the a targeting issue, if you will. In the beginning, after Me Too movement started, it was all about support, which was a great initiative. But then you had, like she said, someone mentioned hijacking. So a lot of my friends in a lot of cases were reported of people posting the Me Too hashtag just to gather support, and instantly having spams of direct messages, attacks, tags, tell us your story, oh, you're not brave enough to mention it. And it ended up feeding this culture of attack against individuals who go through it. And then the Me Too movement, even though it started a lot last year and gathered a lot of momentum, currently anyone who posts the hashtag MeToo is directly attacked and mocked. And I've been in conversations with individuals who'd use the Me Too as a joke, and they're like, someone rubbed shoulders with them against in the street, and they'd go like, Me Too. Yeah. So it ended up being a mockery or a way for people to be attacked. And most hashtags have, like, hashtags for activism end up like this.
Yeah, let's stay a little bit more on the positive sides now, because as I said, we come back to this, particular to the hijackings. But first, I would like also to make the point again of an emancipatory development of the hashtags, because I think when we stay only on this feminist dimension and refer to gender-based violence, there was coming also from within the community the need to express the intersection of oppression that some are suffering from. So I would just have a brief idea of who has heard of intersectional theory. One person, two. They don't need, it's just a question of who has heard of it. Thank you. Okay, here nobody else? Okay, because this can actually very well capture also the idea of what has happened or how to analyze other mobilizations around hashtags. I have now just picked two examples, but there are many more. One comes from the US, Not Your Asian Sidekick, which was also launched then by US women of Asian origin. This points out how hashtags can also be used as a tool of decolonized practice, where actually also women would express how their gender and their race would actually intersect in the portrayal, in sexist portrayal in the media. For example, the Asian woman who's always calm and who is serving We had this last year wonderful lecture on the intersection of race and gender with regards to the portrayal of black women in mainstream media as angry. So these kinds of intersections can also be pointed out in hashtags. And a very recent example from Germany, which is also making a clear reference to Me Too, but it's called Me Too. It collects experiences of racism and discrimination in the German context. So I find it also interesting to see then we should not also narrow our focus on feminist hashtags alone in gender-based violence, but also look out for alliances with communities that need to address the intersection of religion and gender also as well, right? Race and gender and so on. But now we come to the downfalls, of course, and we talked already about hijacking hashtags. I would argue that this is all related to more or less the same power structures, and it's what Mira Marx-Ferré has called soft repression. So she identifies 3 pillars for soft repression of gender-based movements, which is ridicule, stigma, and silencing. This soft repression can be is a bit in contrast to hard repression by state authorities who can use violence, physical violence. But I find this very interesting to also have these concepts in mind when we look at, for example, hashtags or hijacks of hashtags. What is being used by the attackers, by the trolls, in order to, take legitimacy away from speaking up against structures of oppression? How does it function? And I think these 3, ridiculing, you mentioned it actually here before, how it has been ridiculized, right? You said today we cannot even post Me Too anymore. This is a kind of ridiculing. It's a very powerful way to silence, to repress, ridiculing, right? So that was a very good example there. Another example of for silencing online, we have heard it also before, it's like harassment online. It's like terrible words that I will not repeat, but of course this is also part of sexualized violence. And it has led many women to delete their tweets, even to delete their accounts, so they're silenced, right? So these things also work online. Because Mira Marx-Ferré, when she was putting up this concept, she did not think of mediated interactions or of online mobilizations, but in general. So if we stay with the silencing, I give another example because we talked yesterday about algorithms. I've heard also here somebody was interested in specifically looking at censorship in the new age of algorithms. And I think here, the Uprising of Women in the Arab World, has anybody heard of it? This group? Yes. Yes. So it was created actually like right after the uprisings in 2012. And it's very much related, really, to the uprisings, to the usual uprisings, right, of 2010 that started in Tunisia. But here, what happened was that one picture posted on Facebook they made different initiatives. I don't know. Does anybody want to explain shortly what's the aim of this group? Do you feel comfortable with, or? So they made different actions. For example, writing posts saying, it's what they call self-mediated protests, a selfie protest, sorry, where women took selfies of themselves, women and men, by the way. I am saying I'm with the uprising of women in the Arab world because, and then they gave their reason. So it was also an individualized protest. And one of them, one of these pictures of a Syrian woman actually was deleted on Facebook and was blocked. And it was not clear, like I investigated a bit into this with the founders of the uprising. It was not really clear, was it because of Facebook's policy? Was it because of the picture has been like by the many, because many have signaled the picture? And it was, I think also the website, the Facebook site from the uprisings had to go offline for 2 days. And this has created also like a more transnational debate on feminism and vulnerabilities of social media platforms, because it was just not clear where does the censorship in the end come from. And but so these can be hidden dynamics, but when we come back now to the more open dynamics of the hijacking hashtags that we have already mentioned, yeah, I think they are we have already mentioned also ridiculing, that you can easily transfer from Miramarx-Ferre's model on silencing or on repressing movements. The derailing is another method that you can see emerging when you analyze hashtags. What do you think is derailing in that context? Is anybody familiar?
Stopping it from reaching its actual objective and making it go for a separate objective. Like yesterday, the presenter Dr. Paul gave an example of Pepe, the meme, which was originally used for a comic, which was toward children entertainment. Then it was used for joking around on social media, and then it became an alt-right movement. So like derailing it, like making the Me Too movement into like you said, ridiculing of people. Like right now, currently on social media, it's mostly used for describing people that are trying to ruin good people's works and lives, like actors and businessmen, because of talking to them or just putting a hand on the shoulder. That's, I think, is derailing.
I would also say I read a very interesting comparison. Like when I account, oh, somebody stepped on my foot in a community, or in a circle of people, and then people would interfere and would say, yeah, but that happens all the time, and I didn't step on your foot, you know? Like it's just, I just put out there, somebody stepped on my foot, and if somebody takes this incident, he derails it by talking about all the others or himself. It's not about yourself. This is also like a part of derailment. What you had then was also the hashtag not all men. You can also interpret it as a derailment, because it's not about men in this case. It's about especially also women's experiences, and it's also about gender. So, do you have a comment on that? Yeah.
As for derailing, sometimes especially in Arab countries that have faced uprisings, so when women started to talk about their issues, they always bring up the matter of security and national security, and that we have bigger issues to address, rather than you have been harassed, or someone checked up your skirt, or someone poked up your arm, or something like that. It's like, oh, we are suffering now, so we have more important issues, rather than addressing your inconvenience while you're walking street yesterday. So I guess this is a part of derailing, and that we are experiencing every day. Every day women are posting things about harassment while they are in taxi, while they are walking, while they're in university or in schools, even from another women or so on, or even in the metro. However, whenever they started to address up, even women themselves starting saying, oh, so we are now focusing on your issues. Oh, thank God that we are not like so and so and so and so. We have bigger problems to address, or use your social media platform for a bigger purpose. However, the bigger purpose is me. If I'm not okay, then the country is not.
That's wonderful. Thank you very much for this intervention, because also what you mentioned here is, what is security? What is national security? Who's the nation? we are the nation, right? Somehow, like, or that's also, there's another question, I come to you in 1 second. That's exactly what also feminist political scientists try to do, is actually to deconstruct also the idea of security. Is security absence of war? So can we have security by only by military actions? Or does security also mean that me as a woman, I need to go to the streets without being harassed? This is only if this is the case, we can speak of national security. So that's very, very important. So we have here Leah, and then to this issue, yeah? Okay.
So when this discussion took up, in Spain they started discussing criminalizing some sort of comment. So if I'm on the street and somebody makes a comment I don't like about my physical state, like I feel like I'm harassed, I can go to a police officer and complain about it, and then he will either like be taken over or he'll be even charged. So it's a discussion, it's not taken up yet. And then a lot of my Spanish friends were discussing, so okay, I cannot even tell a girl she's pretty now. And they took it up in the sense of, I cannot even express if I like somebody now on the street or to a friend, just because I could be reported. So I think this is a very interesting way security is being discussed there, because on the one hand side, you as a girl need to feel it's okay to report even minor harassment, but on the other side, where is the border? So where we say, okay, it's too much, where do we say we're interrupting like normal communication patterns?
Yeah, you're coming now to the very difficult subject of framing and translating to legislations, what we have also seen now, and I will give different examples. But yeah, in Spain, Germany, same discourses. Egypt, Tunisia just had released new legislations on sexual harassment into this year. So there was another comment. Yeah.
Thank you. Just on, following on your comment on the Syrian woman being silenced. We have many hashtags in Syria in support of women expressing themselves on Facebook, like Ta' Mabsuta, where actually many cartoonists were invited to represent the harsh realities of women, and they were displayed on billboards in Damascus, and many of them are actually men, who participated in this. Another thing is that many women are victimized by women themselves, and sometimes by women from other nationalities. So I do have an example of a Syrian activist who is posting in support of women, but then the comments from women in different countries who are maybe happy with the way they live their lives are very demoralizing sometimes. Thank you.
Thank you, yeah. Of course, this demoralization, these hijackings, this does not only occur like men versus women. We're not talking about this one-way dimensions, but yeah, patriarchy, there are many people who profit from patriarchy and that want to sustain this kind of system. And yeah, there was a question there.
I'd like to bring up an example that doesn't necessarily count as derailing, but it does threaten the inclusivity of this initiative. So Me Too started out as a movement for the everyday woman. It concerned everyone. But the involvement of celebrities kind of tilted the conversation towards Hollywood, and it almost became exclusive to the entertainment industry, and not, for the whole. What are your thoughts on that phenomenon?
Yeah.
Thank you.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah, we can. I take this too, and then I continue with the presentation.
بنفس المسار اللي تحدثت فيه زميلتي هنا. أنا أود أن أسأل عن بس لا صار في صوت كويس. استكمالا لما قالته زميلتي، بس أنا بدي أسأل عن الأثر السلبي للهاشتاج، خصوصا إذا كان غير مدروس أو صادر عن منظمة غير مختصة. ما في صوت. لا عندها أسأل عن الأثر السلبي للهاشتاج، اسمعوا صوت، إذا كان صادر عن جهة غير مختصة، يعني هاشتاج شعبي قد يكون له أثر سلبي. يعني لنفرض مثلا هاشتاج ميتو، قد يقول قائل خصوصا في المجتمع العربي، يعني هل المجتمع متحرش مثلا، أو الهاشتاج اللي طلع ليس كل الرجال، يعني قد ينبني على هذا الهاشتاج ثورة أخرى مضادة له عند طرف آخر قد يكون مناقض لهذا الهاشتاج. فكيف يعني سنوازن بين الأمرين؟ يعني هذا تحديدا السؤال.
Yeah, there was a question right behind that. And then I said I continue with the...
شكرا. هل تعتقدي أنه ساهم ذلك في نشر الوعي المجتمعي في تسليط الضوء على هذه الظاهرة في ظل غياب الأرقام الحقيقية، وتحديدا في بعدد من المنظمات والأجهزة الحكومية؟ وشكرا.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, we already discussed the problem of lacking statistics. Hello? We already discussed the problem of lacking statistics, but I think what we discussed before was definitely also a momentum and a feeling of I'm not alone, and when women actually could also see on their timelines, like, I don't know how many women have shared the hashtag. It is, of course, a different way of data collection, and and the second part of your question was whether I see actually also impact. I think we come back to this later, but definitely it has helped to raise more awareness on the subject. I mean, even with, for example, with Taharush, if I remember that right, the wording itself was not very publicly known. It was not really clear what it actually means. So it has been given a meaning to actions. And this is, of course, if it changes even language, this is a very sustainable impact. So I would like to continue. We talked now about derailing very much, but of course there's also the issue of pushing then political agendas, trying to, what you have also said before, sorry. Of course there's also always the problem that needs to be also highlighted, that political agendas will be pushed. For example, the harassers are only Arabs, or if we talk now about the, can you hear me? If we talk now about the German context, nationalists and racist conservative forces have definitely also tried to hijack these hashtags by exteriorizing or othering the perpetrators by saying it's only Arab men. Yeah? It's not all men, it's not the white man, it's the brown and black men who do this. And this, of course, is pushing political agendas. It functions very well in the instrumentalization of gender-based violence because it is it's an issue that is so emotional, and emotion and sensationalism functions very, very well in political polarization. If you remember the quote of Habermas that I put at the beginning, this personalization, dramatization works very well also in political counter-campaigns. But for now, and I would also distinguish a last way of hijacking hashtags, which is trolling, and we can discuss this like from the political communication science perspective, whether this is just for the fun, if feminist hashtags are being hijacked just for the fun, and what to do with it, like, and even maybe bots are being programmed that, but in the end it is the same thing occurs. It's silencing. It doesn't really matter what's now the intention behind it. But I would like to present one idea of how you can encounter trolls by a collective which is was called then zero tolerance. And yeah, so as soon as they were, it was actually born in the context of the German hashtag outcry in 2015 already. So as soon as they saw, they programmed bots, and as soon as they saw that comments would hijack a hashtag, they would get led to a certain link of a website and a 7-step program to get aware of their, to step out to be a harasser. So, and we will look at the first of the first video. It's funny. I wonder what you think of it, and if it's helpful as well.
Are you struggling to engage with anyone who doesn't identify as a heterosexual man? Well, you may be suffering from what experts call sexism. Now, online, this can manifest itself in a number of ways. For example, being completely unaware of your privilege, starting arguments with, this is not about gender, but in situations where you feel threatened, or have people backing you up, you might start using female body parts as insults, or threats of violence to shut people up. Twitter has no idea what to do about this kind of behavior. But I can cure you. I will cure you. All of you. The first step is to own your behavior and challenge your denial instinct.
I would tell myself that I'm just expressing my opinion, that it was my right, or that women were just using the fact that they were born with a vagina to get attention or sympathy.
Denial likes to dress itself up in all sorts of clothing. Logic, indignation, self-righteousness, martyrdom. Denial can be very, very comforting, like a glass of warm milk before bedtime. But it will be your downfall, just like him. So, what are you waiting for? Take that denial, rip out its heart, and take a dump on it. The world sees you as a sexist bigot. Why? Well, because you are. But you can own that. Now is your moment to step into your personal power and say, yes, I am. From there it becomes easy. More followers, the power to influence people, a great body, and great sex. That's what you want, really, isn't it?
I really like the reformed troll. Any ideas about this? What has happened here? What's going on? What does this? Yeah, maybe here, Hulud.
I think the general issue is that the conflict between men and women. I think it's about bullying more than sexual harassing. In our society, we live in a place that most of men, I am not going to say most of men, some men are bothered by seeing women walking in the street, working, and especially in good jobs in government. We can say this is bullying more than harassing. A man harassing a woman because she wear hijab, because he doesn't like hijab. Other men harassing a woman who doesn't wear hijab because he wants every woman are covered. This is about culture that man taught since he was a kid. He thought that he is number one in the family, in the street, in the work. He is the manager. He is the god of the family. These words that all the time he hear. So he thinks that he is number one. He is the god, and women is someone has created to serve him. Most of men now are educated, maybe they are trying to fix that, but in deep soul of our society, I'm not talking about persons, I'm talking about society, we have this culture. So every International Women's Day, we hear a lot of this. Why there is International Women's Day? There are no. You have 364 days, and we have 1 day. And at that day, we live the same life we live the whole year. We are not queens at that day. This is a culture of society, not personal acts.
Thank you. Yeah, of course, because it also shows the limitation of such media projects, right? It's like the idea to educate some trolls, whether it's actually the education in the family and the transformation in the whole system that needs to be done, and education starts at a very young age. Yeah, thank you. We can come back later to this, and I would just shortly go through my presentation, also because now we will talk about the idea, when we stick to the idea of analyzing hashtags, we had said it in the beginning, is to analyze the spillovers also to the mass media. And what has happened here on the mass media, the Time magazine has called the Me Too movement, the silence breakers, as the person of the year. Now, I don't know what, I mean, it's great because you get really your media attention, but also we are again in this idea of personalizing. And when you make Me Too persons and the person of the year, do you really also then see behind the structure and what the person has to say? So this is just like a rhetorical question. I mean, to say, if you want to analyze this spillover, for example, at the example of this Time magazine cover, it's complex. But I pick up your point, Hulud, that you made before. It's about also question of men after Me Too. So very quickly, because unfortunately I would really like to come to the outcomes and the political analysis also of it. But what do you think about this? What does this caricature tell you? What do you think? I mean, it's also the spillover to Guardian, a mass medium, English. Yeah. Here.
Yeah, I think it has been a heavy result on men because of these hashtags. Every man now is having that feeling of guilt. Am I like them? Am I harasser? Okay, we all know that there are very respectful men, and men are defending women and protecting women. That's for sure. But we need to focus on those few numbers of men are hurting us in the streets, are bullying on us. This is a big heritage, I know, but we have to. This is a war we have to fight in.
Mm-hmm. So yeah, what you're saying also is that it has been a burden, like what we see here. It's like, oh, now I carry my masculinity, it's so hard. Yeah, a comment right here. Maybe you before, because Jada has spoken already. But you come back to you.
I don't know, maybe I can see from a different perspective. Maybe it will be like a responsibility. So to be a man, it's a responsibility. so you have to participate in Me Too, in like raising awareness, in protecting women, in getting or acting in a positive way when you see a woman who is attacked or is encountering any kind of harassment. So it's more or less responsibility than a pressure. And this is a positive, when we put this in a positive light, actually it makes it more engaging for males to participate in such things. If I accuse them of being harassers and they are like doing all the shit in the whole world, actually they won't be able to actively participate in the society regarding such feminist ideas. So it's more or less engaging them rather than accusing them.
Yeah, so you both pointed now out also very this positive idea, and to what we also see actually in the video is it should, or it can be seen as a chance to reflect on your own privileges, on your own role in upholding also a system. And with regards to the method, the concepts we mentioned before about ridiculing, derailing, victimizing, of course this can also interfere here. It's like, I am now the victim, or we are the victim because all men are being accused, which is of course not true. But this can be then, especially when it spills over to mass media, and what we've learned with Habermas, is that it's being personalized, and that it's being, you enter again a very reductionalist logic. So what the empowerment aspect or the positive aspects then very often get lost. You two, very short comments on this, okay?
I think that so far women have always been made aware how they behave, and there's been a lot of shaming in just being a woman. So like, oh, you're seducting men, oh, you are, we know how this course went. And nowadays, with feminist movement, we're making men aware of their own behavior. So like, we're making them aware that even maybe a simple comment can make a woman feel uncomfortable. And I think this picture shows it very well. So like, being a man, you also need to be aware how you behave, and you also need to carry your masculinity with caution to not have negative effects on people.
Thank you. Yeah, and last comment from Jada on this. Yeah, in the middle.
I really like your interpretation of responsibility, because otherwise I would have said I find this some sort of derailing too, because I mean this image did not come from nowhere. I mean really every woman or like I could say that has been harassed from any man, and it's international. It's not just in the Arab world. It's done in many sort of ways. So it's not about, if women tend to say, okay, most of men harass women, they have the right to do so, because I mean this is the daily experience. And I'm really against people saying, okay, all men are bad or something, because this is awful, this is sexist also. But I mean, if someone says, okay, like many men or the most of them have a certain way of thinking, or they objectify women or something like this, it is true. If you watch TV, music videos, anything, it is true that women most of the time are objectified in many different ways. So it's not something that's coming from nowhere.
Yeah, so this is really then also an example of how you can interpret this in both ways, as getting aware of privilege, taking up responsibilities, your own role in the society, in the way it's constructed, or it can also be interpreted as another sort of derailment. So we discussed it before with the question of harassment, which is, I would also argue then, is another spillover. It's the spillover to the physical space, which facilitated by new technologies, because this is the possibility that you actually bring up your experience that you're having in the physical space online, on a map. And it has been actually transmitted to different other countries as well. And I find this also very interesting, because it shows the interaction with technologies on the interactional level of the public sphere, but also then bringing it to the representational dimension. So you actually have it represented in a map for everybody to be seen, where maybe also hotspots of sexual violence can be identified in the city. And this, I would argue, is of course also another very emancipatory way. But the question is, when we look at to use technologies. But of course the question is also who is filing these reports, who has the resources to actually have the technologies at hand, to file a report. So it also, of course, also excludes specific women or specific people of using this technology. I mean, this we should also always keep in mind, the exclusion mechanisms that are still occurring here. So in general, we can say that the political communication infrastructure of feminist projects remain, of course, vulnerable. We have heard it before in the lecture on the economy of the media. I mean, we have stated there are hijacks. There's algorithmic editing going on. We don't really know why certain content is being erased. So you don't have really control over the content. Selected sensationalism is the question of, for example, what stories are being picked up? Are those women actually also okay of being spilled over to the mass media, etc.? And something what I call also the multi-layered visibility. So when you put yourself out there, yeah, even if it's online, you're putting yourself out there. You become visible. You become visible for alliance buildings with other women, with other movements of resistance. But at the same time, you are being vulnerable for being attacked. And what we've also heard before is the question of state authorities that also see you. So you also sometimes don't really know how this is being perceived by state authorities. So it's multi-layered visibilities that go along with when you go out and talk about sexual violence. So we have shortly discussed this before, the question of political outcomes. There was a question here also. Of course, I would say in the case of Germany, you could see that there was a strengthening of already existing institutions against sexism, like on the institutions like for anti-discrimination offices and so on. The services have been used more by women after outcry. And so what would be a consequence is that when there is more demand, the state should also allocate more money to this kind of institutions, so they are being strengthened. So then you saw new creation of new alliances, like trans-regional feminist networks have emerged. Trans-regional feminist networks, and that have led to the adoption of new legislations on sexual violence. You mentioned Spain, there is Germany, but there is also Tunisia. In July 2017, there was a new law which makes it easier to prosecute not only domestic violence, but also sexual harassment in public spaces. So there are direct political outcomes and policy changes. Then from this, I still would call it a political outcome, because I think as soon as we raise awareness, introduce new concepts and so on, it has political consequences, so I would not make this distinction. So there is more literacy on the issues of violence against women, I would say. Definitely for journalists, I mean the fact that I'm today here and we can speak and have a conversation about this, and all of you are working in this field, has gained momentum and has shown that there is more literacy on the issue, or the possibility to transmit this knowledge. And yeah, now maybe, and that's why I'm also rushing through this a little bit, because I was hoping to have also a discussion now on the last ideas of values impacting change. Like what what in the end, in the last consequence, does this mean? We have spoken about national security and who defines national security. So I think also the Me Too movement or the Me Too hashtag has been so prominent because of Hollywood, yeah? Because it comes from a center of power, but also because I think it was in the context of a presidency of Trump, who is a harasser. Like, he said it clear, it's on record. So I think it's also, we have to see this also, that this mobilization is encountering conservative backlashes and sexist rollbacks. Like under Obama's presidency, I think nobody would have thought that there would ever be a president coming who's able to say such things and also normalize this kind of discourse. So there is a clear mobilization going on that is not only against the Weinsteins, but also against the presidents. So we also see then on the long run a renegotiation of gender roles. You mentioned it, the question of what's the role, what's the expectation of man. He has to provide for the whole family. Is this possible in the capitalist system nowadays, where you need at least 2 jobs? Is it possible? It's not possible. Like in most of our societies, one income is a dream, you know? So gender roles are being negotiated. They have to be renegotiated. And the question of toxic masculinities is being posed in this context. The question of whether, I see you have heard of the concept of toxic masculinities. Yes, so we're also then discussing of how can also men get out of this role of being the aggressor, the dominant person, the person that nourishes the family, which he cannot do anymore because of the circumstances, or like most men, right? Like we're talking now about, I'm not talking about the upper class or the 1% here. And in the end, I think what is also important in the context of media and security studies is the question of the more peaceful societies and demilitarization, because it is also toxic masculinities that enable security apparatus to work the way they do right now. And I would like to finish on this idea that with feminist hashtags that have pointed out this violence on the personalized level, on the interactional dimension of the public sphere, that we have seen going through the representational dimension and now actually also reaching policy and changing legislations, we can actually then, we can conclude that we are going farther and farther to a renegotiation of social contracts, and also hopefully to more peaceful societies where everybody can just express themselves. And also security is not only related to the military, but to the well-being of everybody. And I thank you here. Thank you for your engaging discussion. It was very, very interesting. Thank you. Okay, so we have 5 minutes? Okay, if there's some time, we have 5 minutes left, please.
طبعا بالبداية نشكرك على هذه المعلومات القيمة. أعتقد برأيي أنه هذا الشيء يختلف عن بين المجتمع الشرقي إلى المجتمع الغربي. فالمجتمع الشرقي بموضوع من القواعد والمعايير اللي أنه تتخطى هذه الموضوع التحرش. بالعراق ضمن وزارة الداخلية اكو قسم اسمه الشرطة المجتمعية. فالشرطة المجتمعية أنه واجبها أنه تصد هذا الموضوع أو أنه تكف عن التحرش اللي يصير بالنساء من خلال التوعية بالمؤسسات أو من خلال المدرسة أو من خلال الجامعات. أيضا عندهم برنامج خدمي عبر إذاعة وزارة الداخلية، وأيضا عندهم هم على البرامج اللي بالقنوات العراقية، أنه إن أي حالة صادفت أو إن أي مرأة تعرضت هذا الموضوع أنه لا تستحي، أو أنه ماكو هذا الشيء للسخرية، أنه تتصل وأنه يتم التصدي لهذا الموضوع وانه يتم مجابهتها. وايضا يعتمد بالعراق على نوعيه الملابس، يعني الحجاب والهدوم البقيه انه تختلف عن طريقه اللبس بالغرب، فهذا اعتقد انه هذا الموضوع هم يعتمد على هذا الشيء، لكنه بالعراق نسبه التحرش قليله نسبيا بنسب ما ذكرتي حاليا يعني.
Okay, thank you. Yeah, for what I've heard is the question of we need to train security personnel, and you gave some positive example from Iraq where police is being trained to actually also handle cases of sexual harassment. So we come back to the idea of education, which is so important here. But there came immediately one question here. Okay, so we don't have. Don't have anyone. Okay, but I. The 5 minutes you gave me before, so okay. Thank you very much. So we keep it here, and thanks. Now we ended up with another positive example of actually applying this to security, like the police and the military. Thank you.
Thank you.